I didn't really want to have to make this video. This is it. The straws of Warhammer 40k's many problems have finally broken this old camel's back. They've worn me down, and I'm never playing the game of Warhammer 40,000 ever again. In fact, I'm taking all of my 40k models, crumpling them up into a little ball, and throwing them into a raging dumpster fire to make room on my shelf for my new passion, Corvus Belli's Infinity the Game. I'm just kidding, check the date on the video. But I did want to take this opportunity to talk about some of the issues that Warhammer 40,000 is facing right now that are making many members of the community actually feel that way, and some of the potential solutions that we 40k players as a community could try to implement to repair these issues. Let's do it! What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and this is another one of those discussion videos. Today, I wanted to editorialize about a discussion that is consuming the Warhammer 40k community at the moment, and that is, Warhammer 40k is bad right now. Obviously, this one might get a little negative, so heads up for that. If you're one of those folks who strongly dislikes that style of content, no shade. I've done a ton of Tyranid videos talking about the new 9th Ed Codex over the last couple weeks. You can go check those out on the channel. I really appreciate it. This graph of faction win rates is currently doing the rounds of the 40k Twitter sphere and is fairly damning, with the top 3 factions, those being Custodes, Tau, and Harlequins, with an honorable mention for Craft Worlds, pushing 70% win rates, and are the only factions realistically allowed to compete in the competitive scene at the moment. The last few rounds of the Adepticon Champions Major last weekend, featuring an almost identical Harlequins mirror match with 2 very similar lists, has been memed on endlessly. And that spectacle was repeated at GTs and Majors the world over, beating out other meta contenders in droves for top placings in big events, and securing a wild 70% win rate for the Harlequins side specifically. Also, check out my interview with Zach Point, the Adepticon 2022 winner from this week's Tactical Tuesday. It was a really good discussion, and we talked about some of the ways we could fix Harlequins. Shameless plug. That result is emblematic of a problem the game is currently experiencing, with rampant power creep. This process began as far back as the release of the Death Guard Codex in January of last year, with almost every subsequent release, with the possible exception of Adeptus Sororitas, maybe Thousand Sons, and probably Genestealer cults, although those factions at the time of release were not bad by any stretch of the imagination. We can't all be perfect, overpowered super weapons. In the past, we've seen action taken much faster and more dramatically by the Games Workshop design team than the relatively tepid rate that Games Workshop has been currently addressing these issues of balance. By way of example, Adeptus Mechanicus came out to a similar result, winning a bunch of large events almost immediately upon release. They got hit with their first round of nerfs a tad over a month after their May 29th release date, their first balance FAQ hitting in the first week of July. Contrast that with more modern factions like Adeptus Custodes and Tau Empire that are pushing 3 months of dominance, with barely even a bug-fixing errata that released months after the initial release of the Codex, and even now retain absolutely ludicrous win rates. Now, I know there are going to be a lot of commentators down below typing out about how
this is just how 40k has always worked. It's nothing new. Get with it, you weird internet turtle man.
And I admit, I don't have as much experience with Games Workshop's process of power inflation in their games as a lot of folks do. I got started with modern 40k a few weeks before the 8th edition Space Marine release, which to my knowledge was the most powerful set of releases in the entirety of that edition. But while subsequent nerfs did tone down the initial release of those Space Marines over the next few months, releases after it, the 8th edition Adeptus Sororitas Codex or the Psychic Awakening supplement cycle, while they did produce ludicrously powerful and probably broken lists. I'm looking at those mechanized Craft World lists versus Adeptus Mechanicus finals that we saw over and over and over again at the tail end of 8th edition. They still failed to recreate the almost instantaneous 80% win rate that pre-nerf Iron Hands enjoyed, and it's looking like unnerfed Harlequins may be slipping into. This isn't the dynamic that we're seeing in 9th edition, though. With a steady ramp-up of new release win rates and no sign of stopping, potentially culminating with the Eldari Codex, although honestly I doubt it. I think it's a pretty good chance that future releases are also going to be wildly overpowered. And let's face it, regardless of whether or not this dynamic is how things have always been, or it's nothing new for 40k, or it's just the permanent existential state of 40k as a concept, and to change it at all would be a violation of the game that we hold dear, because we absolutely love unbalanced messes, this game state absolutely sucks. And even if it is the shape that 40k assumes from now into eternity, as someone who's pretty partial to Warhammer 40,000, I would like to see it improve. It turns out it's okay to criticize the faults of something you love and hope that it improves so that it can grow in the future. That's just part of liking something. Now, facing 3 months of watching nothing but 2022 Crodexes grind sensuously against each other like writhing earthworms in the ecstasy of mating season, people are just burning out. Anecdotally, lots of players that I know are limiting their 40k playtime or dropping the game entirely because of this issue. I've all but entirely stopped covering competitive events since streams and battle reports with Tau or Adeptus Custodes in the title get dramatically less traffic than other matchups, and those are largely the only armies powerful enough to ever make it to the final rounds of an event, at least pre-Harlequin release. And on a personal note, these issues have also made me become less interested in pursuing competitive play. Last week, I attended a local GT, got paired with an Eldari list in the first round, lost the roll-off, and got compacted into a tiny, dense cube of matter the size of a quarter, which was then thrown bodily into a dumpster by a bunch of D-cannon platforms. As is generally the case with 40k tournaments, my opponent was awesome to play against, and we had a fun time during the game. And my opponent also ended up undefeated after 5 rounds, so big congratulations to them. But the struggle of fighting uphill against the latest and greatest army, even with an army that I felt was the best I had to counter the meta with my chosen faction, made the whole experience less than exhilarating. So I ended up going home to stream more 9th Ed Tyrannid Codex content instead of continuing with the tournament. Unbeknownst to me, this also created a buy in the event that I later apologized for. It sucks for people to show up to the event and not get a game to play, so that's totally my bad. Ultimately, this summarizes appropriately my experience with competitive 40k at the moment. So to cap off this endless tirade of whining, what can be done about the problem? Now, I'm not naive enough to think that this issue of power creep isn't a structural one within the Games Workshop design team, and how Games Workshop markets its new releases. And with that in mind, I don't believe that there's anything the player base can do to stop this trend on Games Workshop's side. But in the past, the community has taken it upon itself to police the balance of Games Workshop's games. Even as recently as 8th edition, less than 2 years ago, the ITC dynamically house-ruled the core rules and rebalanced their mission format to punish powerful army archetypes. And looking even further into the past, soft scores and points handicaps have been used to try to mitigate the unchecked power of certain armies in Warhammer. So at this stage, do we need to go quite that far? I'm not sure, but I definitely think it's on the table. I feel strongly that competitive events, at least at the GT or above level, should not allow new codexes to be played until they've received 1 or more levels of errata, to allow them to be patched appropriately before seeing competition. In my opinion, this would have a couple of effects. It would, A, root out typos, errors, and inconsistencies that have been rife in recent 40k releases, which to be fair would also make TO's lives easier since the number of last-minute rulings they'd have to implement would be much reduced. B, it would hopefully convince the Games Workshop team that releasing codexes in this state isn't acceptable by the community. And C, it would create a more stable, interesting 40k metagame that's not entirely dominated by flavor of the month armies. Instead, they would be flavor of the last 2 months, I guess. But even that is better than the current knee-jerk dynamic that we have right now. Now, that's my grassroots solution to the issue, but do I think this will actually happen? Oh, maybe. There is a financial incentive for events to allow new armies as near as possible to their release date, since players looking to compete and score easy standings points with pre-nerfed, unbalanced codexes are a big source of traffic for these events. Whether or not that's counteracted by people who are likewise incentivized to go to events that will have a more balanced metagame, I don't know. I have a sneaking suspicion that the folks who are looking for those easy points are probably bigger spenders than the folks who are, but obviously I don't have any data to back that up. That's just supposition. Personally, I tend to steer clear of GTs and larger events for this exact reason, and I would be much more incentivized to go to big events were a rule like this to be in place. That said, in order for an initiative like this to work, it would have to be implemented by the whole community universally, and getting 40k of players to agree on anything is hard enough, let alone structural changes to how 40k events should be run. Obviously, if it wasn't implemented over the entirety of the community, any events not conforming would be havens for pre-nerf codexes and potentially upset how standings points and the potential competitive elo system that is currently trying to be implemented would be delivered. At the end of the day, I don't know if that's the real answer to 40k's current problem and whether or not there is a realistic answer at all. But I do know that the game as it stands is currently broken on a kind of fundamental level. And in the absence of any communication or action from the design team itself, something needs to be done to prevent it sliding further into the abyss. So to summarize the TLDR, I'm not actually quitting 40k, but I will probably be steering clear of events, at least large events, for a while, until the balance of the game or a unified community response improves. Obviously, I'll definitely be talking about the new Tyranids constantly, like non-stop. Like, you'll have to shoot me to stop me making Tyranid videos. Get out of my house! What are you doing? Anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this issue, and if you think there are any other actions that the community can take separate from GW to help repair the problem. Big thanks to everyone who supports the channel, especially over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. Also, YouTube channel members, you can join the link down below. And Twitch subscribers, everyone helping me talk about Warhamster 40,000s are great. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.